therefore give you 1 or 2 minutes over time. So, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Refik, for the introduction. And it is so true that it's very important that the historical dialogue that youth is creating now in the region, but also in different regions of the world, is very important. And what I want to do today is first thank the organizers of this wonderful conference. We had great dialogues and great discussions on the topic of historical justice and memory. And I will try to follow suit in my presentation today, entitled Tweets and Art as Protest to Face the Past in the Balkans. And the crux here, my crucial question is whether or not youth performance activism can help to create or start generating and fueling a historical dialogue in the region. And as the title indicates, I examine a relatively recent phenomenon, and Refik alluded to it. Youth has not necessarily experienced the war, or only tangentially, and so they have a completely different picture. The narratives that they are creating, their imaginative of the war, is different from those older activists that were peace activists in the 90s. And that's a question that I really want to grapple with. And I think Natasha will talk more about performance arts and look at the cultural sphere, where I look at the arts, but created by activists. So it's not quite at the same level, but it is art indeed. So we will look at this by using several case studies. More broadly speaking, this is part of a broader project where I look at why and how youth activism has emerged in the context of transitional justice in the Balkans. And I also do this with regards to what role new social media plays in this whole setup. And as I said, today I only have about 15 minutes. I try to be brief, as to give other speakers also space to present their papers. And I will just give sort of a contextual background of how youth fits into the broader TJ narrative and TJ story for the Balkans, and why my research is so crucial for transitional justice studies, more generally speaking. What kind of tools I use, what methods and design I chose in order to make this happen, and then conclude with a couple of compelling findings that I believe should propel us in a certain research direction for scholars, but also for practitioners, because what's this all good for if it remains in the ivory tower and we can't just draw some conclusions for a broader audience. The research that I will embark on is about a year old and stems from my dissertation work, which was on very much close to home what Katarina is studying now. And I'm working my book manuscript on the RECOM initiative. So what I was basically looking at during that dissertation work, it was called Justice Beyond Borders, the politics that democratize human rights in the post-conflict Balkans. It was very much the struggle of civil society in a post-conflict justice setting, where they had a stalled attempt of establishing this regional fact-finding body across the region. And I look at sort of internal mechanisms or factors and external factors that have led to that struggle, and eventually sort of, some call it failure, some call it stall because they still have hope. But more importantly, what I was doing is map the different actors, and Refik mentioned sort of the field of transitional justice, what that all means, and I'll speak about this in a second. So for me, it is very important to take a step back and look at the different actors and see how they are involved in this phenomenon. And what I came up with is sort of a term that I coined called the legalization of truth spaces. And those who follow Elsa Barkan's and Louis Bickford's speech a couple days ago, it is very much not only contained to the memory discussion, but also to transitional justice, what the effect of legal studies and legalist perspective has had on the broader discussion in transitional justice. And so, but today, as I said, let's focus on the problems with regards to youth and what their role is in this context. A quick reminder of the conflict, even though most of you will know this, we should never forget that over 140,000 people died during that conflict. 13,000 are still missing according to the International Commission for missing persons in Sarajevo. War crimes included rape, torture, and genocide, among others, and 3.5 million people were displaced during that conflict. So how have we dealt with this? In a nutshell, and that sort of brings me then to the youth activism and the performance activism in particular, is here we see a picture of a former insurance building. No, now it's basically the headquarters of the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Refik worked for the institution in Bosnia as a spokesperson, and it has done lots of good, and has also done or gained an image that is very critical, and so they're working on their legacy. So there's pros and cons about this institution. What I don't want to get into that discussion, but what's more important is that because of this, there has been sort of a bottom-up effort from diverse grassroots movements, and especially with more recent decisions such as the acquittal of the former Croatian, or the two generals from Croatia, Mladen Markac and Ante Gotovina, but also leaders from Kosovo and Serbia. With the whole problem or politicization of justice, the court, the tribunal has a hard time, and NGOs across the region sort of trying to create alternative spaces in order to deal with the past. And here a picture of the women in black in